Hi, everybody. So, unfortunately, I have gotten a little bit behind because I haven't been feeling well. I actually should be on chapter 7 already, but today I'm going to review chapter 6. That should have been done last week. Um, for those of you who are new to my channel, the book is called "Whose Life Is It? The Moral Debt for Life Enslavement." I am still looking for feedback so that I can make improvements on this book. And I do have some plans on what I can actually do with it. I know I have some haters here, so I'm not going to necessarily share my ideas with people because I know that some people don't have good intentions. So um, I'm not sure how I can actually make you guys aware of what I'm going to do with this book without alerting the hater who has been hiding in the shadows, throwing hate towards my direction. So you guys are just going to find out the same way everybody else finds out. And if I write any more books, I'm not going to share them for free because I do not take pleasure in having someone derail my work. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is chapter 6. Excuse me, y'all. I'm still sick, so my voice may be cracking a little bit. Hopefully, I won't cough too much. I'm waiting for it to come back up. All right, chapter 6: Perpetual Violence: The Enforcement Mechanism of Life Slavery. Introduction. Chapters 1 through 5 establish the legal. Chapters 1 through 5 establish the legal framework of life slavery. Chapter 1 proved through the disposal rights test that the master state owns your life through its prohibition on disposal rights. Chapter 5 identify your parents as the primary enslavers who committed the original breach by imposing existence without consent. Chapter 3 demonstrated how the master state compounds this breach while extracting value. Chapter 4 documented why courts deny constitutional relief, serving as gatekeepers who legitimize slavery. Chapter 5 demonstrated that state control over disposal rights operates as the legal mechanism of life slavery. The master state monopolizes violence, manufactures legitimacy, and controls the disposal of your person, property, and services across all three domains. The master state does not merely maintain legal prohibitions. The master state actively deploys perpetual violence to maintain your captivity, force your economic participation, and prevent you from exercising disposal rights. This violence operates continuously, not because armed agents literally attack you each morning, but because the threat of violence governs every moment of your existence. This chapter documents the perpetual violence the master state deploys against you, both the actual uses of force and the omnipresent threats that shape your every decision. The violence operates across three enforcement mechanisms: interference with disposal rights over persons, interference with disposal over property, and interference with disposal rights over your services. So there's a little bit of overlap between chapter 5 and chapter 6. Chapter 5 sort of identify your disposal rights, and then this is talking about the violence that maintains it. Democracy as a system of perpetual violence. Before examining specific enforcement mechanisms, we must establish how state violence operates to maintain life slavery. This section documents a systematic pattern that appears across all three domains: person, property, and services. The omnipresent threat versus actual force distinction. State violence operates through both actual force and a constant threat of force. The master state does not need to literally attack you every morning. The threat alone, credible, omnipresent, and backed by the state's monopoly on violence, controls your behavior. You comply with prohibitions because you know resistance triggers escalation. How state violence differs from chattel slavery only in labeling. The master state deploys violence functionally identical to chattel slavery, but disguises it through pretextual terminology. The master called the violent recapture of escaping slaves a recapture. The master state calls the violent recapture of those attempting to opt out protective custody. The master called labor Service to the master state calls forced labor a civic duty. The function is identical, violent interference with disposal rights, but the labeling obscures the relationship. The enforcement pyramid: threat, fine, seizure, arrest, imprisonment. State violence escalates predictably. The omnipresent threat governs initial compliance. Non-compliance triggers fines, forced disposal of property. And then third, refusal to pay triggers asset seizure, direct taking of property. Resistance triggers arrest, seizure of the person. Continued resistance triggers imprisonment, the complete deprivation of liberty. At each stage, the master state backs enforcement with credible threats of escalation. You comply not because you consent, but because resistance means violence. The master state systematically evades constitutional protections through pretextual classification. Fourth Amendment evasion. The Fourth Amendment requires warrants for seizures of persons. The master state evades this by classifying psychiatric detention as a civil emergency rather than an arrest, eliminating warrant requirements while still seizing and imprisoning you. The Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to counsel and criminal prosecution. The master state evades this by classifying forced psychiatric detention as treatment rather than a prosecution, eliminating your right to an appointed counsel while still imprisoning you. These evasions follow a consistent pattern. The master state relabels functionally criminal proceedings as civil or administrative, thereby stripping constitutional protections while maintaining identical enforcement through violence. Chapter 4 documented how courts created immunity doctrines that eliminate remedies for rights violations. Qualified immunity protects police who violate clearly established rights. Absolute prosecutorial immunity shields prosecutors from misconduct. Sovereign immunity prevents suits against state governments. Judicial immunity protects judges from accountability. These immunities ensure that the violence documented in this chapter operates with impunity. State actors who deploy violence interfering with your disposal rights face no personal consequences for violation. The legal system that claims to protect rights instead protects those who violate them. State violence operates through omnipresent threat governing compliance, pretextual laboring disguising the true nature of force, predictable escalation from fines to imprisonment, systematic evasion of constitutional protections, immunity preventing remedy for violation. This framework applies across all three enforcement domains. The specific mechanisms differ: involuntary commitment for a person, taxation for property, occupation licensing for services, but the underlying violence operates identically. If you express an intent to exercise disposal rights over your person, if you state that you wish to opt out of your involuntary existence, the master state imprisons you. The master state calls this imprisonment an involuntary psychiatric commitment under danger to self standards. This interference mirrors exactly how a master prevents a slave from escaping. When a slave attempted to run away, the master deployed violence to recapture and imprison him. When you attempt to run away from your involuntary existence by expressing an intent to opt out, the master state deploys violence to capture you and imprison you. The mechanism differs only in labeling. The master state calls it recapture. The master state calls it protective custody. The function is identical: the violent interference with disposal over your own person. The mechanism reveals the reality. Peace officers physically seize you. The master state transports you through force and against your will to a locked facility. The master state holds you in custody, typically 48 to 72 hours initially, with extensions possible. Staff monitor you continuously. You cannot leave. If you attempt to leave, staff will physically restrain you. This is an arrest and seizure in every constitutional sense. By calling this process an emergency detention rather than arrest, and calling the locked facility a treatment center rather than a jail, the master state eliminates Fourth Amendment warrant requirements, and a Sixth Amendment right to counsel, while still seizing and imprisoning you for attempting to deprive the master state of its property. Involuntary commitment functions as state coercion disguised as medical treatment. As psychiatrist Thomas Size argued, psychiatric confinement, regardless of its justification, constitutes a deprivation of liberty indistinguishable in substance from imprisonment, making coerced psychiatric care functionally similar to law enforcement and criminal punishment rather than voluntary medical treatment. Empirical studies confirm that involuntary commitment operates primarily as detention rather than effective intervention. Research demonstrates that cleanliness, y'all, I'm sorry, I'm very sick, that clinicians cannot reliably identify who will attempt suicide with positive predictive value so low that preventative detention cannot be justified on medical grounds. The master state transports you through force to psychiatric facilities. Medical staff hold you against your will. The master state subjects you to forced medication designed to eliminate your desire to opt out. The master state detains you until you convince evaluators that you no longer have a desire to exercise your disposal rights. The threat of involuntary commitment silences open discussion about opting out. You cannot speak honestly about wanting to opt out without risking imprisonment. Mental health professionals, medical providers, and even friends or family may report you, initiating involuntary detention. The master state prohibits others from assisting you in exercising disposal rights over your person. If someone provides you with humane means of opting out, the master state prosecutes them criminally. This prohibition operates identically to laws criminalizing assistance to escaping slaves. Under the Fugitive Act of 1850, anyone who assisted a slave in escaping faced criminal prosecution. The state enforced the master's property rights by punishing those who would help slaves exercise disposal rights over their own persons. Today, the master state enforces its own property rights over you by punishing those who would help you exercise disposal rights over your own person. The legal structure is identical, only the master's identity has changed. Even in jurisdictions with limited medical assistance and dying statutes, the state heavily restricts access. Terminal illness with a prognosis of 6 months or less, mental competence, multiple requests separated by waiting periods, two physicians confirming eligibility. Oregon's Death with Dignity Act imposes all these restrictions and more, limiting access to a tiny fraction of those who wish to opt out. These restrictions ensure that the master state, not you, makes the final decision about disposal. The state grants permission to dispose only under conditions it specifies, proving it exercises ownership. If you attempt to exercise disposal rights, emergency responders intervene. Police break down doors. Paramedics administer forced treatment. The master state physically restrains you. The master state transports you through force to hospitals against your will. And the master state subjects you to medical interventions you did not consent to. The justification is always saving your life. But this framing reveals the true relationship. You do not need saving from disposal of property you own. The master state interferes with your disposal rights because the master state claims superior ownership over your person. Property taxes demonstrate that the master state interferes with your disposal rights over property. Even if you fully pay off a mortgage, you must pay annual tribute to the state, or the state disposes of your property through seizure. You cannot retain property without state permission contingent on continuous tribute payments. A slave cannot own property outright. All property nominally held by a slave belongs exclusively to his master. As the Texas Supreme Court held in Cartwright versus Cartwright, a slave's property belongs exclusively to his master. The same principle governs your relationship with the state. You cannot truly own property when the state can force disposal through taxation. The annual tribute proves the state's superior ownership. You hold property only with state permission, revocable when you fail to pay tribute. If you fail to pay property taxes, the state sells your property at auction. If you resist seizure, the state sends police to remove you through violence. The ultimate enforcement mechanism is armed agents who will physically remove you from property and transfer it to others who will pay the state's demanded tribute. At the end of the day, property taxes mean that individuals cannot actually own property. The master state owns said property, and if you do not continue to pay rent to them, you can still be evicted by having your property repossessed. The master state exercises superior disposal rights, the power to force disposal when you fail to pay tribute, proving the master state effectively deprives you of autonomous disposal rights over property. The master state forces you to dispose of property when a master state decides disposal serves public purposes. Eminent domain allows the state to take property for roads, utilities, economic development, or other purposes the state defines as a public benefit. The master state interferes with your right to refuse disposal. The Fifth Amendment explicitly authorizes this forced disposal, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. The Constitution does not grant you the right to refuse forced disposal. It merely requires the state to pay what it deems just compensation. The state claims superior disposal rights. You must dispose when the state commands. The state seizes property suspected of involvement in crimes through civil asset forfeiture. The state charges property itself with crimes and seizes it without charging a person with anything. Police take cash, vehicles, homes, and other assets. Then the state auctions them for profit. The state disposes of your property without your consent and without due process. The Institute for Justice study policing for profit documents that law enforcement agencies seized over 68.8 billion in assets through federal and state civil forfeiture programs between 2000 and 2019. Most property owners never get their property back. The majority of forfeitures occur without the state filing criminal charges. The master state exercises superior disposal rights. The master state simply takes property and disposes of it while you must petition for return. The master state interferes with how you may dispose of property. Zoning laws and building codes restrict how you may use and develop your property. You cannot build housing without permits. You cannot operate businesses in residentially zoned areas. You cannot subdivide land without approval. You can only dispose of property through methods the master state permits. The enforcement mechanism is always violence. Inspectors have police backup, courts issue orders. The master state enforces through armed agents. If you refuse to comply with orders regarding your property, the master state arrests you. Income taxation forces you to dispose of the product of your labor for the state's benefit. You must provide a percentage of your earnings to the state. The master state interferes with your disposal rights over your services. You work, generate income, and the state claims a portion of that income as tribute regardless of your consent. A slave master claims ownership over the slave's labor and extracts the fruit of that labor. The master state operates identically. The master state claims superior disposal rights over your labor through taxation. The master state extracts a percentage of your earnings as tribute. The percentage may differ, but the principle is identical. You cannot dispose of your own labor autonomously. The master takes his share first. If you do not pay income taxes, the IRS assesses penalties and interest. If you continue to refuse, the master state will seize assets. The master state garners wages. The master state files criminal charges. Federal law explicitly criminalizes willful failure to pay taxes. The master state imposes fines up to $250,000 and may imprison you for up to 5 years. The master state interferes with your right to dispose of your services in thousands of occupations. You cannot cut hair professionally without a barber's license. You cannot provide legal advice without a law license. You cannot work as an electrician, plumber, contractor, or numerous other trades without licenses. You may only dispose of your services with the master state's permission. When the master state determines who is permitted to earn a livelihood, the master state controls life itself. If the master state does not allow you to earn a livelihood, the master state forces you to starve. This is not a meritocracy. This is a system in which the government chooses winners and losers through violence. Economist Morris Clymer's research found that in the early 1950s, about 4.5% of the labor force was covered by licensing laws. By 2000, approximately 20% of the workforce worked in a licensed occupation. The Institute for Justice 2012 study documented that the average state required $203 in fees, 300 days, more than 10 months of education and experience, and one exam for the occupation it licenses. The debt trap. The state first requires that you obtain an education to qualify for a license to earn a livelihood. You must spend years in approved educational programs, often accumulating enormous student loan debt to pay for this mandatory education. The master state forces you to obtain education because without it, the master state would not permit you to earn a livelihood in your chosen trade. The master state forces you to get the license because without it, the state would criminally prosecute you. The master state forces you to incur debt because education costs money, and the master state will not permit you to earn a livelihood without first obtaining an education. The gaslighting. After the master state forces you to get an education, through this entire process, society blames you for the debt, as if you freely chose to borrow money, freely chose to obtain an education, freely chose to seek licensing in a system where the master state imposed all of these conditions as prerequisites for permission to earn a livelihood. If you attempt to earn a livelihood without a license, the master state prosecutes you criminally. The master state classifies unlicensed practice as criminal offenses punishable by fine and imprisonment. The master state deploys police to investigate unlicensed practitioners. Working without permission, even if you harm no one, provide competent services and satisfy customers to subject you to criminal punishment. The master state claims the power to prevent you from earning a livelihood, then the state enforces that prohibition through violence. If you cannot meet the state's requirements and refuse to go into debt, you must either work illegally, risking imprisonment, or accept poverty and potential starvation. The master state forces you to choose: submit to debt, slavery to obtain permission, risk imprisonment by working without permission, or starve. This demonstrates the master state's total control over your ability to sustain your involuntary existence through your own labor. Traffic citations for victimless crimes committed while maintaining an involuntary existence exemplifies the moral obscenity of life slavery. You are the master state's property, traveling to maintain the master state's property yourself, and the master state fines you en route for technical violations that harm no one. In McKenzie versus State, the Texas Supreme Court held that a slave cannot be convicted of murder for an act done while executing his master's orders. In Kennedy versus State, the court compared slave testimony against a master to spousal privilege, recognizing that the dependent legal status of slaves prevented them from testifying against those who exercised legal authority over them. This principle, that masters cannot punish slaves for actions taken in the master's service, reveals the perversity of traffic citations. You drive to work because the master state forces your participation through existential coercion. En route, the master's agents cite you for traveling 37 miles per hour in a 35 miles per hour zone, failing to signal lane changes within 100 feet, or technical violations that created no danger and harmed no one. The master state extracts value from its living property that property seeks to maintain the master state's property. Excuse me. Let me read that over. The master state extracts value from its living property while that property seeks to maintain the master state's property. There is no standing for a traffic citation without actual harm. Who is injured when you drive 37 and a 35? No one. No property damage, no rights violation. The only interest is the master state claim to regulate its property's movement. Empirical research demonstrates traffic enforcement primarily serves revenue generation rather than public safety. Studies by Garrett and Wagner found that North Carolina municipalities with budget shortfalls significantly increased traffic citations to generate revenue. The Department of Justice investigation of Ferguson, Missouri, documented how the city operated its court system as a revenue generating enterprise. The city imposed escalating fines and fees that fell disproportionately on African American residents. Institute for Justice Studies identified numerous small towns in Colorado, South Carolina, and Georgia where traffic fines and fees constituted 30 to 90% of municipal budgets. Police department claimed traffic enforcement protects public safety, but the revenue motive undermines this justification. When traffic enforcement correlates with budget needs rather than accident rates, the system reveals its true purpose, extracting wealth from captive subjects who must travel to perform compelled labor. The state fines you for victimless technical violations, no injury, no property damage, no rights violated. While you travel to forced labor, you must perform to avoid starvation. The magistrate extracts tribute from property, your income, that already belongs to the master. The magistrate enforces this through escalating violence. Failure to pay results in license suspension, then arrest, then imprisonment. This demonstrates total subordination. You cannot even travel to the involuntary labor the magistrate left you to perform by failing to take care of its living property without being subjected to arbitrary fines. The magistrate extracts value at every turn through taxation of income, through citations while commuting, through penalties for noncompliance, and the state backs all of this with threats of imprisonment if you resist. Jury duty exemplifies the state's interference with your disposal rights over services through forced labor disguised as civic obligation. The Supreme Court explicitly acknowledged that jury duty constitutes involuntary servitude, but carved out a notable exception for civic duties. In Butler versus Perry, the Supreme Court held that the 13th Amendment's prohibition on involuntary servitude does not apply to ordinary civic obligations. The court reasoned that the amendment certainly was not intended to interdict enforcement of those duties which individuals owe to the state, such as services in the army, militia, on the jury, etc. The court acknowledged that such service constitutes compelled labor, but exempted it by characterizing it as civic duty rather than slavery. United States versus Kosminski affirmed this position, stating in dicta that the 13th Amendment does not prevent state or federal governments from compelling jury service by threatening criminal sanctions. The court acknowledged that jury duty is forced labor, then exempted it by calling it civic duty. This circular reasoning avoids confronting the substance, whether the state has legitimate authority to compel your service. Jury duty satisfies all elements of involuntary servitude. It is involuntary. The state commands you to serve. It is labor, work you perform for the court system's benefit. The state does not remunerate you or grossly under remunerates you. Most jurisdictions pay $15 to $40 per day, while federal judges earn $244,200 annually. The state enforces it through violence, failure to appear results in contempt charges, fines, and threats of imprisonment to you. Threats to imprison you. Excuse me. The public accepts forced labor for jury service because the magistrate has conditioned them to see the civic duty label as making this forced extraction legitimate. People never question why jury duty pays $15 while judges receive six-figure salaries, they never question why the state cannot simply pay just compensation through transparent taxation if jury services are so valuable. The state could offer competitive wages and recruit jurors through standard market mechanisms. Instead, the master state uses violence to extract labor while paying a pittance, proving you lack autonomous disposal rights over your services. The master state claims superior rights over your labor through the legal fiction of civic duty. The master state claims the power to draft you into military service. The Selective Service Act requires males to register, creating a pool from which the state can force military service during wartime or a national emergency. Failure to register is a federal crime, and the state punishes it with fines up to $250,000 and imprisonment of up to 5 years. A chattel slave owner could sell the slave services to others. The master state claims identical power. The master state forces you to provide services, military labor, without your consent, and the master state forces this through criminal prosecution for refusal. Chapter 4 demonstrated how courts created immunity doctrines that eliminate remedies for rights violations. Qualified immunity protects police who violate clearly established rights. Absolute immunity Absolute prosecutorial immunity shields prosecutor from liability for misconduct. Sovereign immunity prevents suits against state governments. Judicial immunity protects judges from accountability. These immunities operate to prevent remedies when state actors violate your disposal rights. If the police illegally detain you during your involuntary commitment, qualified immunity protects them. If prosecutors charge you criminally for earning a livelihood without a license, absolute immunity protects them. If the state seizes your property through improper eminent domain or asset forfeiture, sovereign immunity bars relief. If judges issue unlawful warrants or issue judgments which violate your rights, judicial immunity prevents holding them accountable. These immunities ensure that the violence documented in this chapter operates with impunity. State actors who deploy violence interfere with your disposal rights face no personal consequences for violations. The legal system that claims to protect rights instead protects those who violate them. Beyond the direct violence, there is the profound betrayal of discovering that democracy, the system that promises peace, consent, representation, responsiveness, protection, and justice, delivers none of these for those trapped in life slavery. The recognition sequence typically unfolds as follows. You experience state violence. You seek a remedy through the courts. You discover structural barriers that prevent relief. You recognize that democracy serves those who benefit from maintaining the system, not those harmed by it. The betrayal is compounded by recognizing the public's active complicity. Your neighbors report you for thought crimes. Your community supports the prohibition on opting out. Your fellow citizens pathologize your suffering rather than acknowledging systemic violence. The public that claims we're all in this together punches down on those bearing the highest cost rather than challenging the power structure that creates them. The moral entry from this systemic betrayal by institutions that claim legitimacy through democratic authorization is profound. The public celebrates democracy while actively supporting the prohibition on opting out demonstrates either profound ignorance or calculated cruelty. Chapter 6 has documented the comprehensive perpetual violence the master state deploys to maintain life slavery. The state interferes with disposal rights of a person through involuntary commitment, forced treatment, and criminal prosecution of those who assist in opting out. The state interferes with property owners' disposal rights through taxation, zoning restrictions, eminent domain, and asset forfeiture. The state interferes with disposal rights over services through income taxation, occupational licensing, conscription, and forced jury duty. This violence operates continuously. The state backs it with the omnipresent threat of escalation. Non-compliance results in fines, seizures, arrests, prosecution, and imprisonment. Immunities prevent remedies for violations. Courts refuse to acknowledge the enslavement. The violence creates comprehensive moral injury, destroying conventional motivations and creating individuals whom the public cannot control through regular incentives. The public's refusal to recognize this reality, its insistence on maintaining forced participation while denying exit, creates conditions catastrophically dangerous to public safety. But violence alone does not explain why the system persists. Chapter 7 reveals capitalism as the economic pillar of life slavery, the system that motivates and benefits from the violence. Chapter 6 documented. All right, y'all. Um, I am going to end it here because that's the end of chapter 6. I'm behind. I'm actually a whole chapter behind. I would like to do chapter 7 tomorrow, but I can't promise it. I'm still not feeling well. If I don't do it tomorrow, then I'll try to do it early in the week so I can get caught up. Be sure to leave some comments, and happy birthday to Devon, even though I don't celebrate birthdays. I assume that you celebrate yours. So thank you, Brother Marcus, for pointing out that it's her birthday. Um, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and end that. Be sure to leave some comments to let me know if there's anything that I left out of chapter 6. I'm going to be moving on to capitalism. I think you guys are going to find that chapter to be very interesting because that really, I don't know, I think it really explains the most insidious aspect of life slavery, the fact that you have to slave away for some corporation, which is done at the behest of the master state. So, y'all have a good day, and I'll be back to do chapter